to wrap up this series on Get Out of My Mind. We're going to be talking about, what is this series about? Do you guys remember? Temptation. Yes. For the win. So, let me ask you guys a question. Do you remember the things in middle school that you said you would never do? And then you did them once you got in high school? Like, there were several of those things for me, but we all have those. Like, there's the things, like typical things, like clothes you never wear, right? The music you promised that you would never be into, and the trends that definitely were not your vibe. When I was in middle school and early high school, you know what became really popular? Skinny jeans. Before that, it was like the baggy pants of the 2000s. Like, have you guys seen movies from like the 2000s? Or actually, anybody watch the show Psych? Psych is like my favorite show. It's one of my favorite shows. I have a lot of favorite shows. But I'm rewatching it right now, and we're in season 1, and it was like mid-2000s, and they've got like the baggy jeans in it and everything. It's so good. And if you've never watched it, it's on Peacock. You can go watch it right now for free. So maybe do that over the break. But it's really, really good, and it's like my sense of humor. Anyway, it doesn't matter. But I remember saying, I will never wear skinny jeans. You will not catch me dead in skinny jeans, ever. Because they don't look comfortable, they don't look good, and I will never do it. And then my senior year of high school, I finally was like, I tried some on in the store as a joke. I was with my buddy, and I was like, oh, look at these skinny jeans. And he kind of looked at me, and I was like, actually, they're really comfortable. And that's basically how I make all my decisions. And so sometimes Chelsea will be like, what are you wearing? I'm like, it's comfy. And she's like, no, go change. So she saves me in a lot of ways. But I remember senior year of high school, I was like, all right. And then I finally wore what I swore I never would. And that was skinny jeans. And now I know they're not cool anymore because everybody's bringing back the 70s, like, bell-bottom pants. I don't like that. I'm not going to do it. But watch me like 5 years from now, like, these are the best jeans ever. It's so dumb. I hate trends. Okay, but things you promised you never do. Another thing was trying sushi. How many of you guys like sushi? So, yes, you, exactly. I was like, in fact, this was more of a, I didn't try it till college kind of thing. But growing up, I was like, nope, sushi, nope, fish, nope, not for me. Like, I like fish. Like, my family went to Long John Silver's. And to be honest, I couldn't really tell the difference between the fish and the chicken as a kid because it was all fried and battered. But anyway, I like fish, but not... Something about sushi freaked me out, especially because I had heard that there's raw fish on sushi. It wasn't until I got a little older and realized that's not all sushi, and now I love sushi. In fact, Chelsea and I have sushi nights where we make our own sushi. We even fry them sometimes because we're American, and it's really good. Make our own California rolls and all that kind of stuff. So, is that your bells? I thought that was her walking back there, but that was just you playing with your bells on your shirt. Stop it. But there's things that you swore you would never do until you did them. Some of them are silly like that, but sometimes they're not so silly. They're the things that you're like, I would never do that, or I would never date that person. How many of you guys have said that? I'm never going to date that person, and then you start dating them, and you're like, whoops. Yep, or I would never try that for me, that's sushi. But then we all do. We do the things that we set out to never do. And this happens with simple things like music preferences and all that kind of stuff, but it also happens in the more complicated areas of our lives. The areas that we wish, like sincerely, we stuck to our middle school promise to ourselves that we would never do. Things like the words we would use, the people that we would be influenced by, the substances we put in our bodies, the things we do with our bodies, the ways we treat our parents or step-parents. There's lots of things that, like maybe when you're younger, you're like, I will never do X, Y, Z. And then you got to an age where that became tempting, and then you participated in whatever it was, or you just got involved in it, or whatever it was, or maybe you watched Twilight and thought something positive about it and lost your mind that way. But you know, actually, one of my favorite things, there's an interview that Robert, what's his name? He's doing an interview, and he's just trashing the whole series, and it made me smile so big. Anyway, has nothing to do with this. But you know what I'm saying. The list goes on, right? And what happens when you cross that line, or when you do that thing that you said you'd never do, is you ask yourself this question probably like, what do I do now? Right? It's this thing that's like, I said I would never become that person. I said I would never do that thing. I did it. And now what do I do? You got a few options, right? You can either have a pity party and just say, I'm a terrible person, and have that whole self-talk thing. Or you can, say, you know what? I'm already too far gone. I've already made this decision. I've tried not to, and I've done it again. So you know what? This is who I am now. Maybe you picked up a habit, or you picked up some things that you do on a pretty regular basis, and you're like, I know I didn't like that when I was younger, but maybe we justify it and say, well, maybe it's not that bad. Or maybe we're like, well, this is just who I am now, and God's just going to have to forgive me. Or there's another option, and that is we kind of start over, and we get a clean slate. How many of your favorite thing about a new school year is the clean slate? Anybody? Like that was my favorite part, because I would like start really strong in the school year, and then in the middle of the school year, I would like kind of slack off a lot until it got near the end of the school year. And I was like, oh, I need to get my grades up. And I would work really hard. And then I would be like, next year, I'm not going to procrastinate in the middle of the semester. I'm going to stay motivated the whole semester, and I will keep my grades up the entire time. And then the next semester would roll around, and I was just as behind as I was the previous semester because I was dumb and never learned. Yeah, it's a hard life. But some of us, we fall into those things. And so we get stuck where we messed up a lot of times. I know you guys can relate to that because we're all human and we've all made mistakes. And sometimes we get caught up in that. We gave into temptation, and now maybe those temptations, like I said, have just become patterns that we stay in, and we find ourselves giving in over and over and over again. It's like the first time you gave in, you were really conflicted about it. And then the second time, third time, fourth time, it got easier and easier and easier to give in because you had already done that before. It was familiar territory. So here's what I know for sure. That messing up or giving into temptation can be one of the quickest ways that we convince ourselves to give up on our belief in relationship with God. That's two things I know for sure. So that, and also, one, messing up or giving into temptation can be one of the quickest ways we convince ourselves out of our belief or relationship with God in order to justify our behavior or something. The second thing I know for sure is true is that we are all 100% flawed, and we are going to make mistakes. So the question has to be, what do we do when we've made mistakes? It's not what do we do if we make mistakes, because the if doesn't exist. It's going to happen. It's human nature. So what do we do when we make mistakes? When we become the person that we never wanted to become, and almost by saying I'll never do that, it was like the self-fulfilling prophecy that made it happen. Or what do we do when we're in that state? So the last few weeks, we've been talking about this. We've been talking about how Jesus, who was God in the flesh, how he also struggled or had temptation and had to struggle with this, do I give in, do I not give in? And we've talked about that the last number of weeks. If you missed some of that, I encourage you to go back and watch it. But he never gave into any of the temptations that he faced, which made him perfect. And that's something that none of us can ever say. But he does have something to say about how we move forward when we have fallen into temptation. And one of his best friends was named John. He was one of the inner three, one of the closest disciples to Jesus. And he writes some of the most famous words that people all over the world know of the Bible. If you don't know anything in the Bible, you probably know this verse, and it's what? John 3:16, which says what? I heard it scattered throughout the room. Most of you were whispering it, but I saw all your mouths moving. John 3:16, for God so loved the world that he gave his one and only Son, that whoever believes in him shall not perish but have eternal life. And everyone's like, yes. You know, Tim Tebow had it written on something, his face, his eye paint. And so people were Googling it all crazy. It's the most famous Bible verse, right? People who don't go to church know that Bible verse. But what people often don't know is the very next verse. You guys know what the very next verse is, if you're not in Bible Bowl? The next verse, so Jesus said, he's saying, for God so loved the world that he gave his one and only Son, which is him, that whoever believes in him shall not perish but have eternal life. And then sometimes we stop there and we think like, okay, but that was before I messed up, or, I can believe in him, but maybe he still doesn't like me. That gives me like heaven insurance, but it doesn't like mean that God likes me, right? But check out the next verse that he says. John chapter 3, verse 17 says, "For God did not send his Son into the world to condemn the world, but to save the world through him." In other words, all of us have fallen short. All of us have made mistakes. All of us have sinned. All of us have given into temptation and not lived up to the way that Jesus did, and only Jesus could. And knowing that, God sent his Son not in case we ever make mistakes, but because we have made mistakes and will continue to struggle with this thing called sin as long as we live in the flesh. In this life, we will always struggle with this. And because of that, he came into the world not to condemn us, but to save us through him, which is a powerful thing to think about. Jesus didn't come to give up on us when we give into temptation. And often we have the mindset that when we give into temptation, we think, well, what do I do now, right? I've already become the person I didn't want to become, so might as well give up, right? I'll be honest, I grew up as a preacher's kid. I grew up in a ministry family. I grew up around church. I grew up around this stuff all the time. Like, I wrestled with this. I still wrestle with it. That idea of giving up on myself. Because I know that if anybody should know better, it should be me, the youth pastor. But when I make mistakes, maybe if I can't live up to my potential and I know better, I wonder if God's ever going to... I know he forgives me, but I wonder if he's ever going to give up on me. And I've had that thought. And so I think God, knowing that we struggle with this identity crisis every time we violate our own conscience and we violate what we know to be true, we wrestle with this. But Jesus did not come to give up on us when we give into temptation. He came to save us from the punishment that we deserve for giving into temptation. And it's a simple truth, but so often we don't live like it's true. We continue to live in hiding. We continue to live as if Jesus does give up on us. And that holds us back from the good things that God has for our lives. And it's a terrible place to be. So what does this really mean for us? I want you to remember this phrase, okay? This is a super easy phrase, okay? It's not profound at all. When you give in, you can start again. That easy. Everybody say it with me. 1, 2, 3. When you give in, you can start again. Okay? There's no such thing as like, oh, well, I've ruined it. I'm already, there's no need to give up. There is no thing in the Bible that says once you make a sin, make a mistake, even if you've given your life to Jesus, you know what? You're trash now. Right? There's no verse like that. In fact, there's so many to the contrary. When you give in, you can start again. And it's a simple truth, but it's something we all need to believe and live like it's true, because God is the God of second chances. It's like that VeggieTales Jonah movie where they're like, he's the God of second chance in the belly of the whale. Like, you Bible kids know, because you grew up like me. But I'm sure it's on Right Now Media or something. You'll be way more entertained by Psych, but you'll probably enjoy the Bible content of Jonah. Anyway, so not like I'm comparing Psych with the Bible. Anyway, the only one who could have given up on you has decided to give you a fresh start. This is important because Jesus was the only, if there was anybody who had the right to judge you, don't you hate being judged by your mistakes, by your friends? If you've made a mistake, you don't want your coach or your teacher or your friends or your parents to judge you for that mistake, right? You don't want your youth minister, pastor, small group leader to judge you, right? But all of us have made mistakes too. The only one who really has the right to judge you is the one who has upheld the law to the full, the one who is perfect, and that was Jesus. If anybody has the right to give up on you or to judge you, it's him. But instead, he gives us a fresh start, which is a beautiful picture. And so what does it look like practically to start again when we've given in. And here's where I want to bring up that story about David that I talked about earlier. See, if you don't know the story, David was like this. He was probably the best king that Israel had. And even he made massive mistakes. He's known as the man after God's own heart. So, like, how many of you would like the nickname, like, I'm the man or I'm the woman after God's own heart? Meaning, like I have a heart like God's. Just pure gold, right? That's a great title. That was David's title, the great king of Israel. But even David succumbed to temptation. He went on the top of his balcony in his high and mighty kingdom at the peak of his kingship, and he looks down and sees Bathsheba bathing. Ooh. Bathsheba in the bath. The irony is not lost on me. And he looks down at her and goes, I got to have that. And I'm king, so I can. And problem was she's married, and her husband was off at war. Well, it gets worse, because then David impregnates her. Her husband's off at war. How do you explain that? You knew some of David's servants saw her come and go, right? Like, this wasn't going to be a secret for long. So what's he do? Oh, I'll bring her husband back to sleep with her, and then it can be like she's pregnant with his baby, and it'll all be good. Well, I think her husband kind of knew what was up, because it's not normal for the king to call you back and then try to get you to go home and enjoy your wife. And so he says no. He doesn't even enter his house. And by doing so, he wrote his own death sentence, because then David sent him out to the front lines to be killed. Then he took Bathsheba as his own. And then it took a prophet named Nathan to come and confront King David with a story about a rich man who had many sheep, and then also a poor man who only had one sheep, who loved his sheep, took care of his sheep, and lived for the sheep. And the rich man saw the poor man's sheep and thought, I got to have that. And so he takes the poor man's sheep away from him. And David's so upset. He goes, that's terrible. Tell me who's done this, and I will bring the biggest punishment ever on them. And that's a biblical quote, too. I will bring the biggest punishment ever on him. So, and then Nathan, being the wise prophet, goes, yeah, that's you. Remember Bathsheba? That's the poor man's sheep. And yeah, mic drop. And it's in these moments, after David has to now reconcile this with, not only did I know that I did something wrong, but now everybody knows. And I know God knows, but now I have to face this reality. And it's in these moments that David pens these words in Psalm chapter 51. He says, create in me a pure heart, O God, and renew a steadfast spirit within me. This is the posture that we should take when we've given into temptation. David was writing this in response to probably the biggest mess up of his entire life. It ruined his rule as king. He never reached the same level that he was prior to that. It set a lot of things back. God does seem to forgive him and help him prosper still, though. And it's kind of cool if you read the story. But what we learn from this is that you and I can do the same thing. If David, hopefully none of you have done something so bad as that, okay? If you have, you can still be forgiven. But hopefully you haven't. But even somebody who's done something like that, this is the posture they have, and it turns out okay for them, right? And so the same thing that David did is something that you and I can do. So one, I would just encourage you guys, when you've given into temptation, you don't know where to go from there, ask God for a pure heart. Just like David, create in me a pure heart, O God. Look to him and say, God, I have violated what you said was good, and I turned it into something evil for my own gain. So God, give me a pure heart. This is like old school language. This is like church talk. Give me a pure heart. It means make me as good as new, right? David says elsewhere in that psalm, like, blot out my transgressions, like blot it out, make it go away. I think of white out over like ink. Blot that thing out, like, so that you can't see it, so it's literally white as snow. Like, but that's not a Bible imagery. That's a Zach's head imagery. But David, just create in me a pure heart, oh God. And that's what you should pray as well. And God will give us what we pray for when we're praying earnestly. The second is another old school like church talk thing, but it's live with a steadfast spirit. Steadfast is just a really fancy word, but it's another way of saying solid or committed. Give me a heart that can stand firm in the face of temptation. Help me to yearn only for you, so much to the point that I don't give in to these other temptations because I know that your truths are better. I know that your promises are better. I know that your ways are better. I know that you've designed me for better. So give me a pure heart. Give me a clean start. Give me a fresh start. Jesus says that it is better to have the faith of a child. Like there's a childlike faith. Like remember when you were kids and like you just had the purest heart. You just like believed the best. Like even when bad things happened, you would say, God's still in control. And right, you weren't so jaded by the bad things that had happened to you when you were a kid. And Jesus talks about having like a childlike faith because that's the best kind of faith there is. And this give me a pure heart. Give me this childlike faith again. Give me this like resurgence and renewance in my life that just helps me to see me as you see me. And so, you know, when you do something for the first time, something good, something that's exciting and riveting, and it's like there's this innocent joy that you find in that thing, and then the more you do it, it's like your first time riding a roller coaster. It's like the best thing ever, and then after you've done it like a billion times, you're like, it's still really fun, but it's not as cool as it was like when I first did it, right? And give me a pure heart. Make your words as fresh to me as they were from the first day I fell in love with them. That's what this prayer is. Give me a steadfast spirit. Give me a heart and a spirit that is just solid, committed to your ways above my own. And that's what you should pray. The thing about this is God is the only one who can do this. If you try to will your way into submission, if you try to will your way into better behavior and will your way into like just pure willpower, I am never going to make this mistake again. First off, you've already proved that's not true. And second off, you just can't do that. God is the only one who can do this. This is what he has promised to do. And it's exactly why he came 2,000 years ago to become God in the flesh, to show us what this means, not to condemn us, but to give us a new, pure, steadfast life that is earnestly seeking after him in everything that we do. And that's what I want for you. When you give in, you can start again. Don't allow your mistakes to warp your faith into disbelief. Don't allow it to convince yourself that you're not enough or that you're not worthy, because we aren't enough. But don't let it convince you that you're not worthy of his forgiveness, because Jesus settled that at the cross. Don't allow your mistakes to keep you from the good things that God has promised for your life. When you give in, you can start again. So I hope that you guys are encouraged by that. I hope that you take a posture of humility when it comes to your own mistakes. Don't try to hide it under the rug. Don't try to pretend it doesn't exist. But live like David. When you give in, you can start again. Ask God for a pure heart and a steadfast spirit. And I promise you, the more you exercise those muscles in your brain and in your spiritual life and your walk with God, the easier it will be. It's like walking uphill, like up a mountain when you first do it with like a 20-pound backpack on. And then the more you do it, the easier it gets. And so I encourage you to put your faith in God so much that you allow his words to define you every time. So that's all I got. That's all we got for this series. Thank you guys for being here, and thank you for just being a part of this community, because it wouldn't be the same without you. Your small groups wouldn't have the same dynamic. It wouldn't be the same. And so you're loved, you're cherished, and we're glad that you're here. So thank you guys for coming. I'm going to pray, and there's like 5 minutes left if you want to just touch base with your small groups and pray for each other real quick, and then be on your way. But then when we come back next semester, it's January 9th, and it's our Glow Wars. So we're going to have like glow-in-the-dark dodgeball, Nerf Wars. It's going to be a lot of fun. So that's when we're coming back next. You have a question? Lightsabers? No. All right, I'm going to pray. We'll go to our small groups.